prior to.
Got it.
So, okay, I'm going to start over real quick, okay?
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Astenia Caputo here with Valence Fitness. I'm glad you were able to join us today. I took a week off. I wanted to enjoy the 4th of July with my family. I think it's really important to celebrate some things, especially when we are in this situation where we're at home and everything's sort of changed. I wanted to get back, though, to this weekly show of talking about adversity and how we can overcome adversity by finding positive ways of moving forward. And today I have a special guest. He is actually the founder of Sector Consulting Group and the co-founder of Impact Institute. Now, both of these focus on workforce education. Okay. Every week I've had a different type of guest, and I think it's really important for us to focus on individuals. Right now, people are having a hard time. They're unemployed, right? So how can we help in that way? I thought it would be really good to have my next guest here to talk a little bit about that. Now, he has personally mentored individuals who are unemployed, but formally they have been incarcerated. But that's not it. I mean, obviously he has also worked with those who are CEOs, head of large corporations. But what he does is he relates what he does is he works on their communications during this time of adversity and their perseverance. And so I wanted to introduce you to my special guest, who I've known for a few years, Mr. Michael Higgins from Texas. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thank you, Astenia, so much for letting me come on the show. I really appreciate it. That being said, I want you to know I appreciate you very, very much. You are a...
Where have I heard this before?
I know, right? I appreciate you. You're a friend, and you know, when we've done work together, I just want you to know I really believe in a lot of the things that you do. We really support that, and I do appreciate it very much to be on and to be here with you. So thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. There are I've discussed this with a few friends that it's not that easy to find guests that I feel really have a sincere story to tell. And I'm going to give you an example. And unfortunately, I had reached out to someone. I said, it's very, there are very few people that I reach out to that I trust that will be able to give me insight into who they think would be a good guest. And that person actually was offended. They said, I'm offended that you didn't ask me. And that really spoke volumes to me. That wasn't exactly the route I wanted to go. I really want to find those individuals who have a story, but it's not about them. And it's not about our own egos. It's about us feeling for others and helping them through this time, especially during this time of adversity, to help them to be stronger in their mindset, to help them grow strength mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, in their social abilities, and also intimately with one another, especially when they're working from home. And I really felt that you were right up my alley, the type of individual that I'd love to have on board. I know that you have this ability to tap in with individuals and really listen and not make everything cookie cutter, and be able to assist the individual, even in a big training session with, big, groups. I think you have this ability to hone in and help. And you have you have empathy for people. And I think that is a really important trait to have. So I really would love for you to share with us your story and help us. There was one thing that you said that I really liked. Where was that? You said, some people believe that it's unfair to endure adversity. In actuality, enduring adversity gives people an unfair advantage. I want to know what that unfair advantage is. Help us understand, Mr. Higgins.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought process, and I think when you've gone through adversity, it changes your perspective of the world around you. You actually see the world in a different way. And in seeing the world in a different way, it actually is frees you, right? I mean, it helps you find freedom in many ways that others can't. I remember years ago when I was going through a very difficult personal struggle. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the personal struggle, but I will say this: it was detrimental in every aspect that you can imagine in my life. And during that time, I had a very close mentor and pastor who was we were working together on this, and he was mentoring me. And he goes, "Michael, the adversity that you're going through right now," he said, "I can see how this is going to completely alter the way that you view God in a positive way." He said, there's a part of me, he said, that I wish I could know God or see God the way that you're seeing God as you're going through the adversity. But he goes, "But I don't want to go through the adversity." I don't want to go through that in order to see that. And it was very true. I think at the time I was just very caught up in the world around me. And, it was hard for me to really understand what he was saying. But now, several steps after that, several years, a decade after that, I can easily look back at that and I can go, wow, I did break outside of the norm. I did experience something that helped me see God in a different way, maybe a very realistic way. Thank you, Lord, for letting me go through that, because now I have a different I see it differently. And I can communicate that as well. Oh, and by the way, there's hope after that as well. And it causes you to not be so fear. We're going through troubled times, to say the least, right now. And previous adversity, I believe, is really kind of helping me. I can kind of look ahead and go, okay, well, maybe this is going to be in my future, or this is going to be in my future, or whatever the case may be. But I know, because of what I've been through in the past, no matter what happens in the future, I know I'm going to make it. I'm going to be just fine and get through that entire process. So, but yeah, I do appreciate that. That was really kind of the basis of that quote. And something else, Estania, that you mentioned, I do appreciate. You mentioned the word empathy. And to me, one of the secrets of really, understanding and overcoming any adversity that you may have in your life is to, first of all, have some degree of empathy. And this whole word empathy, I think we throw it around a whole lot. I hear people use it a lot, but to me, I really look at empathy as being a superpower. Actually, it's a superpower that can be used for positive or negative. It can be a good or a bad thing. And we teach a lot about empathy in our classes. It's one of the first things we do, whether we're dealing with someone who's a corporate professional, or whether we're dealing with someone who is, like you mentioned before, they may have been formerly incarcerated and they're living in a, in a halfway house. We always take time to discuss empathy, because empathy is a key to survival. I think I first understood empathy years ago. I'll kind of let you know my age a little bit. I started off my career in 1991 as a school teacher. And during that time period, I taught 8th grade American history. And I noticed that, history, historically is taught, oh, you got to memorize these dates. You need to memorize this person's name, so on and so forth. But the passion of history really comes from being able to live the life of the people that you're studying, to really understand where they were coming from. I think we miss that in today's society a little bit. It's very easy for us to kind of judge people from the past based on how we live life today. But we're really, to understand where they're coming from, we have to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to understand, what was their world like? What did it look like? What did they have to do in order to survive? What did the financial system look like? So on and so forth. So by kind of putting ourselves in their shoes, it allows us to better understand why they made some of the decisions that they did. It helps us understand various things. So empathy is a big component to basically overcoming adversity.
I completely agree with you on that. I apologize. I had to mute myself for a second.
Oh, that's okay.
I had a studio that I was utilizing for this, but I'm like, you know what? I switched providers and I thought this is going to be so much better to just do this at home. And I have to tell my kids, you know, I think everyone's pretty forgiving nowadays because everyone's working from home.
That's
I have to tell my kids,
yeah.
you know, tell the neighbor kids not to come over on Saturdays at 3 o'clock. But then I have these rambunctious kids that still come around and then the dogs go wild. So I was listening. I totally agree with you on the adversity part. I want to hear more about, you know, you had mentioned it to me previously about, you know, I want to hear more about that story about in history, the history of and how you learned about adversity that way.
Oh, you mean how we practiced it? I realized quite honestly that, you know, when you have students, the only way they can really understand and grasp what others have gone through is they have to put themselves in that situation. So we talk about leaders. We never talk about leaders as being perfect. We never talk about leaders as having the answer to everything. We always discuss the pros and cons because nobody is perfect. Everybody makes bad decisions. They make decisions that actually, you know, in some cases with leaders actually lead to the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And these are burdens that they have to live with. I mean, talk about adversity. You know, you can just imagine that. It's very easy for us
I really can't. I just can't imagine it.
No.
Like, wow.
It's very difficult, but for some reason, you know, we as a society, it's easy for us to step aside and go, well, you know, they did this. We don't really know. We really have to place ourselves in that situation to better grasp, to better grapple with why they made some of the decisions. And we're looking at it from 200 years after the fact. So it's real easy for us to go, well, man, I would have done that. I would have, you know, if it were me, I would have. Well, you really don't know if you would have made that decision or not. And we really don't know if that decision had have been made. We don't know if it had have actually caused worse circumstances to occur as a result of that. So we really have to be, you know, I'm not saying that we have to misplace our values or what we believe in. I'm just saying that sometimes it's very important for us to better understand where they are coming from. And by the way, that's not just applicable to history. I mean, if you stop and think about it for a minute, I mean, you know, to the listeners that are out there, I'd like for you to just think for a minute, you know, how many friends have you lost? How many family members have divided and don't talk to each other anymore? How many of you just absolutely don't even go on social media anymore because if you express your opinion, you're going to be attacked by people who, you know, you've historically had a great relationship with. And I don't understand. To me, it's very difficult to understand why it is we can't even come to the table and have a conversation. And I think one of the reasons why is because we just don't have empathy. You see, I don't have to agree with somebody. I don't have to look at a person and go, oh, okay, I'm going to abandon my values and accept yours because you debate better than I do. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is we have our core values. But in order for us to get along in society, to keep this society from fragmenting much more than it already has, it's important for us to understand why a person thinks the way that they do. But I think we get so defensive about our own personal belief system that, you know, it's almost like if I have a belief system, I shouldn't be concerned that it's going to be threatened if I have a conversation with someone who politically believes something different than me. What I really need to do is listen to what they have to say. Why do you feel that way? So communication in gaining empathy is really the key to making this all work, even overcoming adversity. I have to be able to communicate. I have to be able to ask the right questions. And I need to also not necessarily be offended. I need to be able to listen to a person, and instead of being offended, I need to listen to what they're saying and kind of live through their circumstances. I see why a person may be politically different than me because I'm actually putting myself in their life. Mm-hmm. I'm actually putting myself, oh, you were born here. Oh, wow, you were raised this way. Oh, wow, your family values were this. Oh, and at the end of our conversation, I can look back on it and go, I may not agree, but I certainly can understand why they have come from a different background than me and they feel the way that they do. So I do not want to have the anger. I don't want to have the bitter feelings. I don't want to, have myself out there, fighting a fight when really what I need to do is I need to try to build a world of peace.
Yeah. It's like reading
Because
a good book. It's like it's not about you. It's the
Mhm.
book and the characters in the book, and you want to get to know the characters, and you want to see how they progress and where they go. I actually just wrote something today that came to mind is hatred is your barrier on the bridge to enlightenment.
You're exactly right. Yes, it is. And talk about barriers. Oh my gosh. I mean, that's the first thing we have to do is we've got to look at the barriers in our lives and we've got to figure out, well, why do I feel the way that I do about something? So I've had the opportunity literally for the last 25 years in my career. I've had the opportunity to work with companies all over the U.S. and other parts of the world with individuals from all different walks of life. I mean, you name it. I've just had the opportunity to really get to know people, whether it be in a presentation format or just sitting down one-on-one. And there's so many different things psychologically that we can look at, and I think we can overanalyze it. But I really think what it boils down to is what are the barriers that we have? What is this thing, that keeps us from communicating? And it can be very simple things. It's gender issues. Sometimes it's regional issues. Years ago, I remember going up to New York and training a class. And it was very different, right? Because there were very different dynamics. Here's Texas boy, coming out to New York, and I'm talking with my Texas accent, and they're talking with their New York accent. Kind of like those of you from Chicago, we talk a little bit different, right? and
I don't know. Do I still sound like a Chicagoan, or do I have a little hula in my voice nowadays?
You got a mix. You got a mix. My wife was formerly from Chicago. I guess she still is from Chicago, but I'm turning her into a Texas girl. Yeah. Sometimes it comes out, right? You can't help that. Yeah. But either way, those regional differences, they come out in the way that we communicate. And sometimes we make judgments about people just in something that's a barrier. It's a barrier. It's kind of like, I'm from Texas, oh, he's from Texas, so, oh, he must think this way. Or, oh, wow, they're from Chicago, they must think this way. And we put barriers up and made some assumptions based on those barriers. So I think it's very important that we recognize our personal barriers. What are those things that are keeping me from having empathy and properly communicating with the people around me? Once I identify those barriers, now I can figure out a way that I can remove those barriers. But I have to know them within myself, right? So if I'm telling stories of barriers, I think of, there's generational barriers. There's gender barriers. There's political barriers. There's race barriers. There's, whatever it is. If I walk into a conversation and I happen to know you, we've communicated quite a bit in the past, so I know you. But there's always that sizing up, right? I mean, there's always that moment in which you look at me and I look at you, and in our mind we're sizing each other up and, trying to figure out the communication circumstances. Well, what I need to do is stop doing that. I need to take, what am I sizing up? What am I looking at? What are the things that I'm making a judgment about you? An age, barrier or a gender barrier. I need to recognize it and go, I need to remove that. Because if I have this barrier in place, I can't properly listen to what you have to say. And so that just opens up the door of communication. To overcome adversity, you've got to communicate. Communication is the biggest factor in overcoming adversity. Unfortunately, we tend to, when we go through adversity, what do? We shelter in place. We pull in. You know, we don't want to talk to people, so we shutter ourselves. And we don't want to get out and even go ask.
Take the dog off. So
What's
sorry.
that?
I had to. I thought I was on mute for a second.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. This is like one of those. It must be. Is it going to be a full moon? I swear. This was like not the way it was going to run today, but that's okay. This is life, and this is like about also my own adversity.
Hey, there you go. Right.
My own adversity. I had what came to mind. Well, fear was a big thing that just came to mind when you were talking about everybody clamming up and, you know, pulling in and all that. But I wanted to get into a little bit about, so, okay, you're talking about getting to open up, to listen. How does this translate into the workforce from both perspectives? As someone going in, looking to get hired, and for someone who is the employer looking at hiring individuals, bringing them into the fold. How should people utilize what you're saying?
I think the first thing we have to do is we've got to get away from computer filtering. You know, what I mean by that is that, like, for example, you know, my wife and I, we own our business. And one of the things that happens is, oh, we're gonna try to find someone who's gonna be a contract trainer or something like that. Okay, cool. Well, let's run them through this specialized computer software that's going to determine whether or not they're a good fit for us. I realize that that's a great way to, you know, to kind of figure out whether or not a person has qualifications. I get that. But at the end of the day, how many people are we not talking to because we're not taking the time to really get to know them? And so I think what's important is that we have a preconceived idea. We have a computer formula of what we need for a job and what we need to hire people. And I don't think that's always a healthy way to do that. You may have a person who fits all the criteria, but they're not necessarily a really good fit for the culture. The culture of an organization is really the key to everything. I've got to have a culture where I can eliminate fear. A culture where I can eliminate the barriers. How do I create that culture? Well, I have to communicate with people, and I've got to be willing to pull away any judgments about those individuals as well. Just like we were talking about communicating. If I'm going to sit down and talk to someone, I gotta look at them and go, okay, well, you know, these are your qualifications. I get it. That's wonderful. But do you fit in our culture? How do I know if a person fits in that culture? I've got to ask the right questions. I've got to really ask the questions of, okay, how many formulas in your lifetime have you created in Excel? That's not necessarily what matters. I get it that that's important, but that's not the question I want to ask. I want to talk a little bit about my culture and ask them how they feel about the culture of my organization. Are you an open type person? You know, do you prefer to be the type person who goes and works alone in a closet somewhere? Are you the ideal candidate to do this work but do it from Montana? You know, or are you the type person who wants to get your hands in and be in every meeting and be a part of it? So we only can do that by asking the right questions so that we can find that fit and accept failures. Accept the failures of people. Man, I got to tell you, Estania, you know, if it weren't for the failures that I've gone through in my life, there's no way I would have any successes. If it weren't for the failures that I've gone through, and I'm talking about whether that's a marital failure, whether that's a failure with my own kids from time to time, whether that's a failure with a business, or, you know, a financial failure, whatever that may be, you know, it kind of goes back to what we were first talking about today. We have to take those failures and embrace them and realize that those were ways that we have become stronger. Those were adversities that made us stronger. I can tell you right now, some of the best workers and people that we have employed to actually do training in our organization have been people who have been previously incarcerated. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because so many times they get into the workforce and there's a stigma and there's a judgment. But many of these guys, they've been in prison for 2, 3, 4. One individual I know of was in prison for over 20 years. Over 20 years. When he got out of prison, He was part of our network. And he was in the class I was training. He was a phenomenal individual. Rough around the edges. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely rough around the edges. But we talked through some of that. We actually ended up hiring him to do some of our training from time to time. And he is a phenomenal communicator. And it is that adversity that he went through. And he has gone on since that time. He has gone on from our class to doing some of the training in our classes to going on and getting multiple certifications in the area of safety. And now he's a safety engineer up in Washington State. And he is doing a phenomenal job. I wonder how many people would have just stopped him. Oh, you've been in prison. You're formerly incarcerated. I have found some of the people who've been formerly incarcerated are the most willing to get out and do the hardest work. Not in all cases, but in many, many cases. So we've got to put that aside. We've got to put those judgments aside. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, so maybe where it actually brings in that whole empathy. I wonder if he has more empathy for individuals while he's training because of what he's been through. Sort of like years ago, I went to continue my education when I was doing this type of, I was studying international relations and business protocol, but I had ended up trying to get my CADC, Certified Drug and Alcohol certification, counseling certification, because I thought, I can recognize individuals who have issues with drugs and alcohol, and I can help with that too. I got gray hair faster than anyone I knew at such a young age. Why? Because I wasn't a recovering person.
Right. That's
so
right.
I didn't even understand from their perspective how to work it. How to really, it takes a certain type of person to have gone through some of these adversities. Like you said, we can have empathy, but it's completely different from having sympathy for somebody who's been through it. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And now I will say this. I do believe that any one of us can communicate with anyone else, even without going through their experiences. I do believe that, if I'm really getting to know someone, and by the way, let me just tell you this, the way we talked through things when I was working with this particular individual, the way we talked through things is, Estania, I asked hard questions. I developed a relationship with this individual, and I asked very hard, real questions. He was willing to discuss that with me. But I asked the questions. I asked him, what was your experience? Did you go through this? Yes, I did go through that. How did you overcome? I literally had him explain it to me in such a way that I was living that world through his communication. It takes a lot to do that.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. You've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to walk into a world that breaks away the comfort, that we have. We keep things so simple sometimes, and we keep it so surface. And so, yeah, it becomes hard. But if I ask the difficult questions and truly listen, and I listen to them while they're crying, while they're hurting, while they're reliving pain, not to take them through it in any way, shape, and form. I would never do that. But if they're willing to discuss it, I listen and I cry with them. Not because I have sympathy, but I cry with them because I can actually, in my own mind, I can place myself in that circumstance.
Yeah.
And that
not all employers are going to be like that, though. They don't want to see them cry. But I think what I'm getting from this, one, you ask them questions to see if they fit into the culture. You're finding out what their value system is and whether their values they really adhere to. Because I could, it's like the doctor who says, you know what, don't smoke. It's not good for you. But then you drive by on the outside of the hospital and he's puffing away on the side of the building. Okay. So your values don't really line up. Okay. So you're talking about making sure that their values are in line with what your culture is, and that obviously that they are, for the most part, transparent. Being able to share themselves with you enough to gauge whether they are the right fit, not to see them cry.
Mhm. That's
but
right.
to make sure that they are, going to be the best fit for you moving forward
Correct.
in your company, and then vice versa, that they also feel that you're the right fit for them. So yeah, I really wanted to see how that all tied in, and I'm glad that you were able to bring all this together for me, especially about the adversity. It's hard for individuals right now. People are really fearful of looking at other people's sides.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And let me say this: the intent. So when people go through our classes, we're very it's very well balanced. So we may do skills training, leadership, communication, all of these different things, but there's also a counseling component associated with it. We get to know our students very well. I have the opportunity of spending many hours with these individuals from a classroom setting. And that was how we got to know him so well. It wasn't necessarily in a job interview,
Okay.
where we're
Like, wow,
breaking these
that's
barriers.
tough.
That's right. Yeah, it was more or less. We got to know him through the process of our own organization, and through our organization process, I realized, man, this guy's a fantastic fit. I mean, it's a benefit that we have being in the business that we have. It's just what it is, because we really get to know people very well. I know that's not really the standard for most companies when they're doing a hiring process. So I just wanted to make that one thing clear. We don't go that deep whenever we're, just interviewing someone. That's a different scenario. But yeah, it takes questions, whether I'm going to have empathy for an employee, or whether I'm going to have empathy for someone who's politically, in opposition to my belief system. I need to ask the questions and try not to be judgmental. I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question because I want to see it from your perspective. Now I'm going to take your answer and beat you over the head with it. That's really not a very healthy way to do that. It's really just kind of me being able to understand, why they're doing what they're doing, or why they're thinking what they are. We may never see eye to eye, and that's okay. But it does at least give me a sense of why a person sees the world the way they do. And sometimes I may have to question my worldview, right? I mean, sometimes I may be introduced to a world that I didn't even know existed. And I'm kind of listening to the conversation, and I'm like, wow, I just never saw it that way. I never understood it. We really have to be very humble. We have to humble ourselves to have conversations like that. We have to really walk in and be willing to accept some things about ourselves, even while we're having those conversations. And I learned this through the years. Again, it's at the end of the day, when it comes to overcoming adversity, it's really not a complicated circumstance. It really does not have to be. It takes the number one thing, we hear over and over and over again. We talk about this idea of, I'm not sprinting, I'm running a long race. It's not. I have to accept the fact that if I'm going through a difficult time period, I'm probably not going to have a solution to that in the early days, especially if it's pretty significant. For example, losing your job. In fact, it may get even worse. I've been there before. I started a business with my dad and brother several years ago. And when the economy tanked in 2009, we didn't really know how bad it was going to get. We knew that we were going to have some struggles. We knew we were going to have some hardships. I had done other things in my life. The type of business we were in, it was really all that they had ever done. It was kind of an engineering company. And so it made sense for me to go and kind of remove myself from the company and go find something else. And ultimately, that choice that I made to leave the company ended up, not only did I lose my job, I ultimately ended up losing my house. I ultimately lost virtually everything in my life. I could not find a job to save my life. It just got worse and worse and worse. And the way I coped with some of that is, and to be quite honest with you, I mean, I virtually ended up, I was almost homeless. I had a very successful business, and then next thing I know, I'm in a situation where I'm practically homeless, and I have no hope whatsoever for an income. I got a labor job. in the oil and gas industry. I mean, that was the only thing I could find to do. And I'd never really had a labor job since, my college days. And this was 20 years past that. So I really had to restart everything. But I realized every step along the way, I realized this is a temporary step. What am I going to do next? So it was strategic planning. It was strategically, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to be in this industry, what do I need to do to be successful? Well, I need to make sure I maintain my job, but I need to go and educate myself in another area at any opportunity that I could. And then I need a plan of action to get myself out of these circumstances. So it really and truly is what I call strategical endurance. We can endure a lot, but I need to have a strategy in place for what that endurance is going to look like. And ultimately, that particular circumstance in my life led to me starting another company, and that was Sector, which is a consulting firm, and it's really evolved itself. It was a safety consulting firm, and it's evolved into an education program for all different types of industries, not just safety. It's also skills training and leadership and all kinds of things. But it was through that adversity, about 5 to 6 years of me literally starting my life over, literally going from having a very lucrative, nice job with my family where I was working out of my home to now I'm actually working in the oil and gas industry in the field, learning how to do things I'd never done in my entire life, to 5 years later being able to open up and start a business that is now has an amazing outreach all over the U.S. So
you got to you got to where you wanted to be. What was it called again? Strategic what? What did you call it?
Strategic endurance. Strategic
endurance. I like
strategic endurance. That's right. Strategic. It's basically I'm going through this, but I got to have a plan. I mean, we can. You got to have a plan. You got to figure out what that looks like. And it may not be what you think it is. I never figured that I would be a safety consultant. I never thought I would be a guy who would be that much into OSHA. But I did realize as I got into the oil and gas industry, I knew I was probably not going to be a welder. I knew I probably wasn't going to be a hand. I was actually one of the oldest guys, working in this oil and gas setting, on pipelines, and I was learning all different types of things I'd never done, and I really wasn't very skilled in any of them. But I did notice there was a need in that environment for people to better understand and live by safety. And so, I went into the safety world and got some certifications, and then I was able to use that, combine that with my educational experience, combined it with the history that I had, and ultimately be able to convert that into something where I started my own company.
I like that. I like that. It's almost like you're saying, I like you're saying, you just never know where exactly it's going to go. It's not, so you found still your happiness.
Absolutely, I did. I found some amazing
happiness. You found what makes you happy. You're taking what you love to do, but applying it to somewhere else and still doing what makes you happy. And I think that is a really important point to make. And I'm glad you made that, because, just because it falls short in one area doesn't necessarily mean it's the end all, right? It can be utilized somewhere else. Use your talent.
You're exactly right. Yeah. I went through a time period where my biggest focus, and if I was talking about it from a biblical standpoint, the book of Job is one of the best books that a person can read when it comes to dealing with adversity. And I spent a lot of time reading about Job, and not to go down that path too much, but ultimately Job went through some horrific experiences, pretty much lost everything in his life. But then at the end of it, there was great reward because he did endure that. And so I look at my life when, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when everything seemed to be at a loss, and I lost my home, I lost this. Ultimately, I ended up losing my marriage, fell apart because of that. And for years, I would look back and I go, oh my gosh, it's so unfair. I lost all of these things. But now I look ahead and I see where I am now, and I've got an amazing wife. We have she's part of the business with me. I'm living a life I never really dreamed that I could have, and I certainly wouldn't have had the life that I have now if it weren't for that adversity. And that kind of goes back to what we first talked about. It changes. It gives us a strategic advantage. When we endure adversity, we can endure things better in life because we know we have an advantage of hope, where a lot of people who have never endured adversity, they don't necessarily have hope when things get very difficult. When and it's sad. I see it all the time. I see people who, they all of a sudden, they're about to lose their job, so they go and they commit suicide, or they're going through some difficult time, and what do they turn to? They turn to drugs or to alcohol or something like that. What is best to do is to just figure out the purpose of the adversity and strategically plan how you're going to get through that. And it may be a 5-year plan. It might take years to get past that, but it will happen at some point or another. And it happens here. Just like you said, it happens internally.
Yeah, wonderful. I am so glad you came on today to share these stories with us. So basically, embrace the adversity, people. Just welcome it, because there's a lot to be learned from it, and a lot of growth that can happen from it, and a lot of unexpected, beautiful surprises maybe just around the corner. And I want to utilize what you said, if I have your permission, strategic endurance. I love that. I'm going to
Absolutely. 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 You learn that if you've ever been in athletics, you know what that means. If you're involved in a sprint or a run or anything like that, you have to strategically plan it out.
Well, I'm just calling it the Michael Higgins saying. That's all. That's what I'm going to call it. But I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
You were to have any last words, you are going to have some last words. Share with us any thought that you might have that you may want to end this all with. What is it really, one thing that you could get across to the people that you think is really important?
It's this, really, thank you for asking me that. I'm glad I have the opportunity, because this terminology, this term balance, comes into place. And I really think that is just an amazing term to use as we talk about it. Valence is not just a scientific term, it's a psychological term as well. There's a lot of different meanings of that balance. I want to encourage, the listeners, go out there and look this word up and look at what it really means, because it has some significance. And really, valence is what brings, from a scientific standpoint, it's what brings the molecules together to have certain formations. And one of the things that we talk about, we teach, through our organization, we teach about the imbalance of the atom. We talk about what happens, electricity, that's how we do a lot of classes on electricity, and what happens when the atom becomes imbalanced. Electricity is the act. Literally, it is the act of the atoms finding balance within themselves. What does that look like? Well, it's a lightning strike, right? I mean, it takes something very significant in a person's life to actually regain that balance in the atom. And I think that is so important, is to have a life of valence, or balance, however you want to look at it. You need to have a life like that. If we get, and I can say that I used to be that 20-year-old kid, right, that was out there wanting to be the most successful person in the room. And I realized that when I did that, I left so many things behind in life. And what we need to find. And as I grow older, particularly, and I do slow down a little bit, I really want to have I want to have this life where there's cohesion, where there's health, where I'm focused on my exercise just as much as I'm focused on my job, where my spiritual life is being fed, and that is helping me find balance. Where I'm involved in a healthy relationship with my spouse. I always taught my kids, the most important decision you'll ever make really is it what you're going to be in life. Well, that may change 20 times, before you're 40, but really it's the person that you choose to walk through life with for the rest of your life. Hopefully, it's that individual, it's that choice that you make. So you gotta be, you gotta have a healthy relationship with family. All of these things really help. So when there is endurance, when you do have adversity, when things get difficult, you're better prepared to handle it. And Estania, I don't know where things are going right now. Every day, I think
none of us do. When you even talked about at the beginning, I don't even know if we talked, because we talked earlier on another show. When you mentioned about about history and stuff, and all I could think about is like how they won't, some people want to take down the history and if it doesn't exist anymore. And I love the fact that you address that. We just don't know where people's minds are and where we're going with all this. But I hope that people will hear what you're talking about here. I think it really, really strikes many chords. But I'm sorry, you were saying you wanted to add.
Oh, no. I was just saying, we don't know. And it is uncertain times. And so we really have to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario. We need to think positively, but we need to plan for the worst. And in doing so, create balance, that bring it all together so that we're very equalized within our own lives, and we're surrounding ourselves with other people, who have a positive impact. Even, we may all collectively go through adversity together. What does that look like? And so that's really how I wanted to close it out. Be prepared. We don't know where it's headed. Things may be wonderful. Things may be wonderful. We may look at the year 2020 and go, wow, here we overcame so many things that we thought were going to destroy us, or it might get worse. We just don't know. But either way, personally, be prepared, be balanced spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, in your relationships, in your preparations. Just get that balance in your life.
Thank you. I knew I liked you for a reason. You liked me from my show. I know, and I could think about, what should I name this thing? It took me a day to think of it, but I thought of it because I started thinking, what do I want? I want people to be fit.
Right.
You have to exercise those muscles.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
In all those areas. So thanks for making me feel really shiny today.
Hey, you're shiny. You are a shiny person. I'm here to say that.
I love that you like my show. Well, thank you so much for your words of advice, your words of wisdom. I know there's a lot in that head of yours. I mean, I've heard you in the past. There is so much knowledge in there and experience that I'm so appreciative of your share with us. And, I just think you're a great guy.
Well, I appreciate everything you do, and man, this is a great idea. Whatever we can do in the future to help encourage this, please let us know. I certainly appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, always put me in touch with other people you feel have stories to tell, that are willing to share of adversity and how to apply these things to their lives, because people are going to need this. They are, and that's why, because things, we just, like you said, don't know what's going to happen. So let's document some great examples and help people through these times.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Estania. I appreciate it.
So much. I appreciate you. You have a great rest of the weekend.
Okay, you too. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Valence Fitness. Look forward to hearing and seeing you next week. All right, that was great.
Hey.